Hello, friends. I'm Evans Mirages, the Harry T. Wilkes Artistic Director for Cincinnati Opera, and this is our second Pride panel discussion of the season. This is something we started during the pandemic to raise the experiences and topics of queerness within opera. I'm especially happy to be talking to you and joining with some dear friends and new friends as well this weekend when Pride celebrations are across the country from coast to coast, New York and San Francisco in particular. And Cincinnati's own Pride Parade is tomorrow morning, in which many of us from Cincinnati Opera will be marching. As we begin this meeting, I want to acknowledge that we are speaking to you from stolen lands, stewarded in the traditions of the Adena, Hopewell, Miami, Shawnee, and Osage peoples. We acknowledge our own guilt. We respectively honor the ongoing struggle and loss through the generations. As a society, we're learning more about the gender spectrum and the ever-expansive ways to express oneself in between this constructed binary. This group of guests will have a conversation on opera and gender nonconformity, alternate gender identities that have happened in the opera history and can continue to be represented on stage. I'm joined by a wonderfully distinguished panel, two dear friends, as well as someone I think will become a dear friend as we go along. Laura Kaminsky, a celebrated composer, whose opera As One, which has now crested 50 productions, I think, at least, was presented by Cincinnati Opera in 2018, our first season back in Music Hall after an extensive renovation. And it was a runaway hit for us that summer. Tenor Freddie Ballentine. Freddie has been with us twice before. He was with us for the Flying Dutchman of Richard Wagner, where he played the role of the steersman, and another one of his inimitable characterizations with which he made his Met debut, Sport and Life in Porgy and Bess. Freddie is actually speaking to you from Music Hall in the rehearsal room, where he and the new royalty of young opera singers are creating a new opera by Gregory Spears and our nation's most recent poet laureate, Tracy K. Smith, called Castor and Patience. And Freddie is playing the son of Castor, one of the two title characters, and Freddie's character is named Judah. The newcomer to our family, as it were, is male soprano Elijah McCormack. Elijah McCormack got his bachelor's degree at Skidmore College in 2016. He was a finalist in the Poème Harmonie Corneille competition in 2019. He's been a young artist at the Boston Early Music Festival, and he is a male soprano. And we're going to ask Elijah to help us with the definition of that, because we've entered a whole new world of not only gender identities, but voice categorizations as well, and the kinds of repertoire where, as it were, the world of who can sing what has just exploded, which is very, very exciting for all of us. For me, as an opera producer, it gives me a range of opportunities that I didn't have even 15 years ago when I started producing opera in Cincinnati. So welcome to all of you. For those of you who are joining us online, we encourage you to put your questions in I believe there's a question or a chat box. And after we have some conversation amongst ourselves, we will be having an opportunity for your questions to be asked by our panel organizer, Carlos Leon. And the other person I want to mention is MJ Lynn, a member of our staff. MJ is our artistic coordinator for New Works and has really been helping us as we jump feet first into some very ambitious plans, which I'll tell you about at another time, but it involves new opera, which is great. But MJ also, during the course of the busy summer season, spreads their wings across many activities, including helping us organize this event. I'd like to start with a question, calling on your individual and mutual knowledge of opera history, and ask, I have a couple of ideas, but can you give us an idea of history of non-traditional gender expression in opera? How far does it go back? And what's a memory of yours from opera history that things are not as they seem, as it were, in terms of who is singing what? It's open to anyone.
I guess I'll go
Go
first.
ahead, Freddie.
You said specifically non-traditional. The first thing that comes to mind, of course, would have been traditional for the time, but the castrati. of course, in early music, who were men who were castrated and did not go through the vocal change as most men had to, as this happened while they were younger. And then they matured with a treble, what we would call the treble voice or a high voice. And would sing male presenting roles with their high voice, or even like female presenting roles, if I remember correctly. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And then, of course, like later on down the line, we came into pants roles, which is when normally when a female presenting singer or a treble voice would sing a male character, like Carabino, which is sung by a mezzo. Or of course the opposite, Viva la Mama, where a female character is sung by a bass, a male presenting person.
And it goes even one step further when we get to a particular opera of Richard Strauss called Der Rosenkavalier, which has a traditional pants role where it is the young 17-year-old lover of the Marschallin, and it is meant to be presented, as it were, to the audience as a teenage boy having what may be his first love affair. But as the comedy ensues, the female singer presenting as a male artist then dons the costume of a female in order to play with Baron Ochs, as it were, in the opera. So Strauss takes it even one step further. But what I'd love to use that as a springboard for is that I think one of the things, if we go back into the history of opera and go back into Baroque opera, which Freddie has already talked about, and Elijah, you've sung a lot of this Baroque music, so check me on this if you would. But gender identity in particularly, I think of 10 Handel operas come to mind right away, not only for the castrato male singer to be impersonating a hero, usually a male hero, but quite often there were female singers, as it were, biologically female singers singing male roles. And not only that, there were tenors who were, quote, boys. In other words, it wasn't gender change, but it was singing something out of your own age range, the way you were presenting in the opera. So it's not new. I think what happens as we get into 19th century opera, particularly when it becomes Italian-centric and we get into the bel canto era, and then we get into, of course, Verdi, and we can bring in all the Germans, gender roles get much more rigidly identified until we get to Strauss, who loved Mozart, and of course Mozart had a couple of very famous pants roles, and then begins to mix it up again. So we've gone through periods in which this is more fluid, becomes less so, and then expands again. And Elijah, I wonder if you'd take us through your own journey of singing roles that present differently, because you've had such experience in Baroque music. What's some of your experience?
It's very interesting because, like you said, the notion of traditional gender hasn't been a static concept. Opera spans quite a few centuries and quite a few countries, and that's a lot of different cultures and different moments in time, which haven't necessarily had one static notion of traditional gender. And so that's constantly evolving, and it always has been. But relative to the norms of any given culture, a lot of cultures at different points in time have historically allowed more gender nonconformity in the performing arts than in day-to-day life, which is very interesting. And Freddie brought up castrati, which are a really interesting cultural item. Some countries found them very shocking and never really warmed to them at all. But then in Baroque Italian opera seria, they were superstars. They were things that people that audiences expected to see after a certain point. And that might seem counterintuitive to us as a modern audience, that they would want to see treble men, castrated men, playing these fairly masculine roles of heroes and warriors and sometimes gods and things like that too. So that's there are a lot of theories about why exactly that would have been. One that I find interesting is the notion that it was attractive to people, that that sort of a blend of sort of the feminine and the masculine embodiment was appealing to audiences. But that was, castrato repertoire was something that was very appealing to me as a transgender singer, because I'm a transgender male singer. And as you said, I sing soprano most of the time, sometimes mezzo. But I've chosen not to pursue hormone replacement therapy for that reason. And Baroque opera, how it plays with gender and the breadth of the body of castrato repertoire in particular was a major reason why I chose to pursue early music in particular.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have had a wonderful experience, Laura. You broke so much incredible ground and created an opera that has, for modern operas, probably holds the land speed record for the number of productions since its creation less than a decade ago, in which you collaborated with an artist who helped you with this story. And would you, I'm sure there are people who are with us tonight who don't know the story of As One. Could you give us a brief sort of background as to how As One came to be and the path that you took with Ellen Reed?
Sure. And I have to say, it was such a joy having it done in Cincinnati. And just coming to Cincinnati for all of the good work that you do is always such a joy. So I'm thrilled to be on this panel with Elijah and Freddie. And yeah, I feel like in a funny way, As One is part of the solution, part of the problem, and part of the hope for the future of transformation of opera, because it challenged so many things. It was essentially, I've always been asking this question: what is the core of a human being, and how do you make your way in the world? I was a psychology major in college. I was not a music major. So it makes sense that I would be always questioning that. As One came about because politically, my wife and I were following the path of states voting on same-sex marriage. And I read an article about an upcoming vote in New Jersey. And I thought, oh, this is not going to be very interesting. I'm sure they're going to pass it. And then I turned the page and there was a picture of this couple. And it was a married couple in suburban New Jersey. And they were being interviewed because the husband was in the process of transitioning. And if this law did not pass, they would no longer be married. And they would give up all of the protections and all of the rights that a heterosexual married couple had. And it hit me so profoundly. That's an opera. Who are you? Who are you in the context of the societal norms and structures? Who are you within yourself and within your world, your relationships, your family and your chosen family? And if you change to be more fully who you are, what does that do? What do you have to give up, and what do you gain on that path to finding your truth? And that was what sparked this piece. It took a lot of twists and turns in my head for a long time. And finally, I saw Kimberly Reed's film, Prodigal Sons, which is her own autobiographical documentary of her going back to her high school 20th reunion, where she had been the star quarterback on the football team, and reconnecting with her family and her high school friends. And after watching the film, it's like, this person is going to make this opera with me. And that was really how it got born. I wrote to the film distributor and said, I'd like to talk to Kimberly Reed about a project. And Kim and I met, and we began mapping it out. What was clear to me, at first, it was like this big piece with a lot of parts and a chorus and the whole thing. And I kept saying, no, this is about somebody figuring out who they are. It's a monodrama, and it's a dialogue with self. And that's where the conception that it would be a male and a female voice being one character. And that's how the piece was born. And once I knew that, then I knew that I had to only have a string quartet. But I don't like the hierarchical nature of operas with conductors telling everybody what to do and the orchestra hidden. So the string quartet has to be on the stage, and they actually have to participate. So they sing and they move around, and the conductor talks. And so it was like, without knowing anything about opera, because I didn't really, I was just naturally breaking all these rules. And so Kim and I began to develop the project, and we knew she's a filmmaker. We didn't want a physical set, although there have been very complicated physical sets built over some of these 50 plus productions. But we had this very simple conception of, maybe a chair or a desk on a stage with a string quartet and a film that would be projected to create the world in which this dialogue took place. And then we started working, and about a year or so later, we realized we needed help with the actual construction of the specific libretto because neither of us had ever done that. I met Mark Campbell. I invited him to join us. He and Kim hit it off, and the character of Hannah was born. It has been a very powerful experience watching productions of it, because I would say pretty much everybody involved, audience members, stage crew, whoever comes up close to this character that Mark and Kim created, comes away knowing this person, because everybody has to figure out who they are. So it's a universal told through the lens of a trans person finding their path to truth. And I think it's because it's about truth that it resonates so deeply. And I think what's been exciting is that in many occasions, the audience is divided between opera lovers who's like, all right, it's on the subscription, I'll go, but I don't really like new opera. And I'm not really sure I care about transgender people. And they come out like, oh my God, I never really thought about this. And trans people or LGBTQ people who come because they want to support art about their own stories. And they come out with like, wow, I didn't know they could sing like that. And it's like the joy of discovery has been so fantastic. It was originally written for two cisgender singers, baritone and mezzo, who play the one role. And it's a married couple who are quite well known in the opera world, Sasha Cook and Kelly Markgraf, both of whom have gender neutral names, by the way. But I had worked with them on a Shostakovich project and thought they were such spectacular artists and beautiful human beings that I trusted them with their intimacy as a married couple, that they could truthfully show a single person in dialogue with themselves on their path. And so that's how the piece was originally born. Since 2014, when it premiered, we have made huge headway in terms of welcoming trans singers, giving them equal footing and place on the stage. So we've been having to struggle with, well, who should sing this now? And do we need to change anything? And we've had several trans singers do it. The most recent production was with Blythe Gessert as the mezzo and Lucia Lucas as the baritone. So she was a trans woman, was playing basically a pants role.
Yeah.
And
she joined us for a panel last summer, as a matter of fact. I think, Freddie, you were on that panel too. Were you on the? Freddie was with us last summer as well, but Lucia was with us on one of our panels.
Yes, I was on that panel. I think it was me, Lucia, and Jamie Barton.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for remembering. Yeah. You talk about conversations with yourself. One of the things that we learned as a company when we produced as one is that it's part of our DNA as a company in these last 10 years, especially, is that if you're going to engage your public in an opera that deserves conversation, I mean, you're not presenting the Barber of Seville. That you can come into the theater and you can have a nice time. You go home, you laugh a lot, right? We reached out to University of Cincinnati College of Medicine, and there we had wonderful panels and discussions about voice therapy and how trans people are treated in our society and in our community especially. And I think those people who came along on the journey were changed. I know that many of my colleagues felt incredibly grateful that we did this work because it changed how they related to one another in the workplace as well. Elijah and Freddie, I'd like to go back to you because Laura, you raised something very interesting. Elijah, you've almost certainly during the course of your development as an artist have had conversations with yourself about decisions that you make. And I'd love if you wouldn't mind sharing any one of those conversations about a decision you made in relation to who you were as an artist and how you would represent yourself as a true artist for yourself?
Absolutely. I almost stopped being one. When I was, when I almost stopped singing anyway. When I went to college, I was newly socially transitioning. I really didn't think that there was much of a place for a trans male soprano in the world of performance. I ended up not majoring in music at all. I majored in studio art and only studied music when I went on to Indiana University. But that was, it took a long time for me to develop an idea of what a career for me could look like. And it took me a long time to realize that there could be one. And that was a major part, as I said, that was a major part of the reason why I went into early music, because it seemed like my voice type sort of had a substantial niche in that sort of scene. Although since then I've gone on to do more new music and whatnot. But yeah, that was a long conversation, and I came out, compared to some people, sort of late in life, 17, 18, which is still quite young, but some people know their whole lives. And so I did a lot of questioning, and after a certain point, I just had to decide to stop questioning, and live my life the way that seemed to feel the best and most authentic. And career-wise, the choice to not pursue hormone therapy, that comes with some forfeits as well, but that's something that I've come to terms with over the last several years.
Freddie, you've had, I'm sure, lots of conversations with yourself as an artist as you begin to develop your artistic profile, where you, as it were, where you reside in the firmament of operatic male cisgender tenors. And for you, I know, because you and I have had these conversations, some of the conversation is not pigeonholing you in terms of what you sing, because there is a tremendous temptation, and it's the whole Porgy and Bess conversation as well that we had in 2019, that once you sing Sport Life, nobody will hire you to sing Alfredo and Traviata. And you, right. And as an African-American singer who happens to be a fabulous Sport Life, probably the finest I have ever seen, but you are also a fabulous steersman. And I have not seen you sing Alfredo and Traviata, but I bet you can do it till the lights go off, as it were. Share with us, if you wouldn't mind, any conversation you've had with yourself about your identity as an artist.
Well, I mean, I have two different thoughts to this. I mean, the first is my identity as an artist and how it relates to my queerness. But if you're talking about specifically my identity as an artist and how it relates to what I sing, I made the decision when the first Sport in Life I did, actually the first Sport in Life contract that I got was for the Metropolitan Opera. And I know that's a big deal, and I'm not saying that to my horn, but like, I honestly didn't want to take the contract because I've been told my entire life that you could be pigeonholed quite easily into only doing Sporting Life or only doing Black tenor roles or only doing character tenor roles if you take a Sport in Life. And I thought if I did it on the biggest stage in the world, that would be the limit of my career. And I was terrified for that. However, I made the decision to go into the production knowing as little as I could about what my predecessors did. If that makes sense. I made the decision to walk in there saying that this would be my sporting life. I would do what I want to do on this. Yes, of course, I listened to the recordings. Yes, of course, I watched Sammy Davis Jr. doing it as well. However, I made the decision to create this role for me. I would have my body in it and have nobody else's body influence me in doing it. And I think that is the only reason that I've been able to get so much work from it, because I didn't sing it. like a musical theater singer would do it, as so many of my predecessors have done. I sing it like as I would do, being the type of tenor that I am with the voice that I have, and I play to my strengths, not the strengths that maybe would have been written for the role. And I didn't move on the stage like a dancer would move. I mean, actually, maybe I did, but I had my movement on stage be influenced by the character itself, and that was more from a very animalistic influence of the character. I think Sword in Life is a literal snake. I think he's the snake in the garden, and so that's how I decided to move across the stage. So I think that all brought the character to a non-character role level, but a more serious, menacing level, which I think ultimately has made it so that people don't think of me as a character tenor when I perform the role. In terms of my identity as an artist and how my queerness relates to it, I think every young male who has an understanding of their own femininity, of their own fluidity, has learned and had drilled into them how to be straight on stage, and also how to be straight off stage, because you never know what a donor could think of you or what an administrator could think of you. And I found, as my career progressed, as I left school, as I finished my young artist programs, and as I started working, that it just was suffocating to have to change the way I walked, not just on the stage, but walking into the theater. It felt like I was being the least true version of myself. And I did make the decision to change that. I made the decision to be myself in the house and outside of the house. When I walk down the street, when I walk into the rehearsal, I am the same person, and that does not change. And I think I now am respected for that. I think it was a little jarring to people at first, because I come in very loud and very proud. I make no apologies for who I am now when I walk into that.
Freddie, you light up a room the second you walk in the door. It can be the darkest day, storming outside, gloomy. You walk in the room and everybody smiles. You're a walking light.
Thank you. I just did this recital with my really great friend, Kunal Lahiri, when I was awarded the Marian Anderson Award, and I had to do a recital at the Kennedy Center. Thank you. And I had to do a recital at the Kennedy Center. And I feel like a lot of times when you do a recital on this level, you don't want to rock the boat. My purpose in doing it was to rock the boat. I really wanted to make an impression. I was singing for Marian Anderson. She rocked the boat. I had an obligation to rock the boat, I felt. And so I decided to do a recital. Kunal and I decided to do recitals that reflected our queerness and also our identity as non-white people in America. But the final song of the opera was written for me by Zach Redler. Really great. Oh yeah, you know him, Lauren. Zach Redler wrote a song for me and it was based off of a person that I knew, Mr. Robert Brown. He was my high school teacher at the Performing Arts High School in Norfolk, Virginia. And he remains to this day one of the loudest and proudest people I've ever met in my entire life. He seriously walked in that room and he owned that room. The way he walked down, I walk the way I walk because of Mr. Brown, because I've never seen somebody walk so powerfully. I've never seen it. But my takeaway from him as a human, he passed away unfortunately, but my takeaway from him as a human was that no matter what happened, he brought joy to where he was. He brought joy and comfort to wherever he was, and that's how I want to be remembered as well. So that was who I decided to be as an artist.
Go ahead, Laura.
For a sec, I just have been so inspired listening to both Elijah and Freddie, because the words, the notion of authenticity and joy, like that's what we wake up hoping to be and do every day as artists. And you both were just so articulate. I have to work with both of you. That's all I have to say.
I can't wait.
Well, that gives me a wonderful entree to putting your wish under the proverbial Christmas tree. For both of our performing artists and our creative artists, how would you like to see gender expression explored in opera? Either by a new take on a traditional existing character, by creating new work. Elijah, because you primarily sing in these two, I won't call them extremes, but your voice gets hired for the early music and your voice gets hired for work that is being created today or of the recent past. It's not likely you're going to be hired to sing Puccini and Verdi anytime soon, but that's okay because there are other people who sing it. But if you could see gender nonconformity and also gender expression in general explored in opera, what would you like to see?
Yeah, of course, I'd love to see more and more new works featuring roles written to be transgender roles. A variety of experiences, a variety of voice types, works that consciously uncouple voice type from gender or deliberately leave space to shape the work depending on who is cast, or have roles where people can be cast regardless of gender. The most recent opera I did was a production of a new work called Nighttown by Benjamin Wenzelberg in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And my role, the role that I sang, was written to be played as any gender by anyone of any gender, with flexibility and allowances to transpose it or even change the name of the character, depending on who is singing the role. So I think that's cool, and that's something that people could experiment with. For early opera, or just sort of any opera prior to the 20th century, the cool thing about it is that so much of it is in the public domain. So we are
Don't let Laura hear that.
we are beholden to nobody.
Oh, good.
We have freedoms that like modern musical theater doesn't have. We can transpose stuff. We could gender bend stuff if we wanted to. And in contexts where we have the freedom to do what we want, people could experiment. It would be interesting to see that more. Do things like cast regardless of gender, see how that changes the text. You might upset a few people and you might end up hating what you do. But it's a thing that we can experiment with. And there's only so much that's been done with that so far, and it could be something interesting to do.
And the world is opening up. I mean, one of the last things that Stephen Sondheim approved before he passed away, and was at the opening night, I believe, was a new version of Company where Bobby is now female. Yep. And that one of the confidant friends, the one who's not getting married today, is a gay cisgendered male. So it is changing there. Freddie, how would you like to see it explored in opera?
I mean, everything that I want to have changes. I mean, a lot that I want to have change is purely for selfish reasons,
That's okay. You're an artist. Selfish is part of the bargain.
I feel like as we're growing with gender identity and also fluidity, I think we're kind of shortchanging ourselves on the opera stage by continuing to just have things be tied to what we originally thought gender was. There are plenty of people in this world whose fathers, the people who they call their fathers, may have been their mothers when they were born. That's not such an odd thing to think of, and I wonder if that's something we can all play with more. I think that so many artists that I can think of, Stephanie Blythe is one, LaTanya Moore is another. They have such a power, not only of their feminine energy, but also of their masculine energy. Was it Stephanie that just did a Carmen where she was Jose? I mean,
that's correct. She did it in Chicago.
Sounds really fucking sexy.
Yeah,
that sounds really powerful. I personally would love to sing a Clytemnestra. I think that in Electra of Strauss, I think I would really, really do that well. And
I think you would be absolutely fantastic. I can just hear you singing now. You have kind of good Clytemnestra. I've had a bad night's sleep.
I just really think we're pigeonholing ourselves a little too much. And I think if we just let the string out a little bit more and allow artists to do things that they feel they can embody completely, regardless of the gender, we could really discover some amazing things on the stage and some amazing parts of people that we haven't explored before. And at the same time, we could probably help to grow the idea of gender expression on a greater whole.
Laura, the glove has been thrown down. You are the pioneer in creating an opera that celebrates the transgender transformation. If you were to return to this idea in general, maybe not as a specific story, but to be able to have that kind of fluidity, what would you like to do?
Well, I'm going to answer in a perhaps slightly roundabout way, but I will
Go right ahead.
answer.
The
But there's
floor is yours.
it's a kind of a multi-part answer, and I think I'm speaking to things that both Elijah and Freddie said, but from the perspective of writing the music. So I had my first sort of like gender binary confusion in a piece that I'm writing now, because I had to write my first straight love scene.
Huh.
Right. And it was like, I had to do a lot of translation to go to a place where it was about this pure emotion between these two people and stop thinking about the male female difference, because that's not me. That's not my life. And I thought, wow, like that was me having a sort of outsider experience in the norm. But it made me really think about all of these issues. And Kim and I recently had a piece that was commissioned by Santa Fe Opera that was premiered last winter, and it's coming to New York this coming year. And we had a bit of a pushing around with this, which is we described the three principal characters by this is the attributes of these characters, and anybody who can present that comfortably and sing well can do it. And there was some pushback. Like, you can't say that. They're going to think you're an idiot and you don't know what the voice types are. It's like, I don't care if they think I'm an idiot. I know what I want. But I don't want somebody to think they can't do a role because they don't fit. I also am trying, I have a new piece I'm developing now where there's one specific singer for whom one role is being created. And this is a singer who's still working, will be celebrating her 80th birthday when the piece premieres. But she's not going to always be doing it. And then I thought, there are lots of great older singers, and some could be men with lower voices or trans women with male voices. Like, why are we getting so stuck in all of this? So I began a conversation with, can there be mutable, like the core emotional issues and the storyline would be sacrosanct, but who sings and plays what can be moved around, and there can be different variations. And I presented this to the publisher, like, I would like to actually structure the piece that way. And he said, you can't do that, because then you're going to have weird key relationships and you're going to change one thing for one singer. And I said, that's my problem. I will figure that out, so that this is a universal story about human beings doing whatever they're doing. And if you're a good singer and you like this story and you want to play that role as opposed to this role, and you can be that character, go for it. So that's kind of where I am. I will say too, like Elijah's decision not to take hormones, I think that there was a thought for a long time that if you're a trans man, you're going to want a lower voice. If you're a trans woman, you're going to want a higher voice. And there was all this, what are you giving up? I don't think that that's the case anymore. I think that people can actually be whoever they want and embrace whatever they're comfortable with, because that's authentic. To address some of these issues, Mark and Kim and I actually have created an award called the True Voice Award that's being administered through Washington National Opera and the American Opera Initiative, that will provide a scholarship to a trans singer so that they can get what they need to be their most authentic artist. And that may mean that they're changing their voice type, and it may mean they're changing how they walk across the room and light it up, whatever it is, that there will be a team of coaches and experts working with the winner, who will get a cash prize and training and opportunity, because we've got to stop being so closed-minded.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my answer. Like, I just go into it and like, those are bad conversations to pigeonhole.
And it's fascinating to me, because once you start to look at the history of our art form, the idea of gender not even confusion, but gender change to also advance a plot is as old as the oldest opera. And so we've been doing this for 450 years. We presented La Callisto a few years ago, and La Callisto, of course, has the character of Apollo presenting, and let me get this, if I can get this right. Is it Apollo? It's Apollo presenting as both male and female. The female version of Apollo is a disguise, of course, in order to seduce someone. And if we look at something like as traditional as Wagner's Das Rheingold, Albrecht turns himself into a dragon and into a frog. I mean, in other words, there's no reason why we can't take operas that already exist, or as Laura is seemingly offering to do, is to create new work where none of that matters. And it can live right alongside those operas where it is, it is part of the plot, or whatever the dramaturgy requires, something like that. But it is a much broader spectrum. And then I go back to something that I always have to engage with, because I'm a producer. So I'm not producing for myself. I'm producing for people who buy tickets and people who give us funds to continue the operation of the company. What are some of the things we can do as artists to help bring the traditional opera audience along? And I will preface that by saying something like As One is like, in some sort of ways, it has already been something of a magic pill, because the most common thing I heard after performances of As One, besides that it was well done and lovely singing and whatnot, is who knew? I did not know about this experience, and I am one step more enlightened because I experienced this. But what are some of the tools we can use as artists, creators and recreators, to bring a more traditional opera audience along? Any thoughts, Freddie, Elijah?
Sorry, I had to unmute. I have two thoughts. The first is that we have to create a truly safe space within opera itself for those who may not have a traditional sense of gender conformity. And I mean, I think that should be an obvious thing, but I think we also do underestimate how unsafe it may feel for so many of our colleagues, And then we have to teach the audience how to also create that safe space. And I don't know how that's done necessarily, but I do feel that I was roommates with a trans artist in Kassel, and she didn't feel that safety when we from the audience necessarily, And I think that definitely does impact her ability to be herself on the stage. And then on top of that, I think we have to, in addition to teaching them what it is to create a safe space, we also have to continue to push the envelope and not make it necessarily easy for them to fall back into the habit because they have the option to do so. And I mean, unfortunately, that is just a necessity in progress sometimes.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
Yeah, discomfort is part of growth, frankly.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it necessarily. I think that when people choose aggression to combat their discomfort, it's very obvious that they haven't been uncomfortable enough. Uncomfortable enough to question why they have chosen anger as a response. But yeah, those are the two things that came to mind for me.
Elijah, I mean, are there things that you have already done as a performer where either as a result of your performance or a Q&A or something where you have had the experience of an audience member or audience members come up to you and say, "Hey, thank you for that. I'm beginning to get it. I think I understand a little bit more."
In terms of them understanding gender experiences more, I've unfortunately mostly interacted with audience members who want to talk about being confused. about my voice and my presentation. And in that regard, creating a safe space with your audience, like Freddie was talking about, it's still very much an ongoing conversation about specifically how we do that, and how we can, because the visibility of trans singers is quite important for all the reasons that we've been talking about. But the issue of how we then protect people who are made visible is sort of a whole other animal. In terms of companies and like, treating your colleagues a certain way, I would always start from the assumption that trans and non-binary individuals are already there and already in the room, even if you don't know they are, because some of them may be closeted, some of them may be stealth, and some of them may not have realized it yet that they're trans. But the point is, you never know. So starting from there, and best practices for inclusivity is an ongoing conversation. There's only so much that program notes can do, but yeah, I mean, I've seen people bring up the merits of companies making public statements, proactively affirming the rights and the humanity and the stories of trans and gender non-conforming people. But it's you can't control how individual people are going to respond and are going to react to it. And to, I think consciously, hiring trans people and bringing trans people into the room, not just as artists, but as admin people and as, creative leads and designers and directors and that kind of thing, is very important. And, programming the kinds of works that we've been talking about. But yeah, it's not an easy
Elijah, you bring up a very important point that I've lived with for many years, because I have a symphonic life as well as an operatic life. I, for many years, was the artistic planning director alongside of my work with Cincinnati Opera for the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. And as Freddie can tell you, I think our company here in Cincinnati has been a welcoming place. I've really pushed the envelope in terms of, in my 17 years here, of having more African-American performers in every kind of role, leading role, supporting role, women, men, and in core repertoire opera. I made a vow when we first did Porgy and Bess that none of the principals, none of the sort of the titled big roles would sing only Porgy and Bess. They would either have had to have been engaged for a core repertoire role before, or by the time they arrived for the production of Porgy and Bess, that they would have a contract to do something in a succeeding season. And I've done it both times we've done it. I don't talk about it because it's nobody's business but mine, but it is a way to affirm to the artist that, yes, there are going to be times when you're doing a role that is, as it were, genre specific, if you want to call it that, but you're an artist first. And as I said, Freddie has sung the Steersman with us because I wanted to make certain that Freddie was recognized by our public as an artist who sings lots of things. But in the world of symphony music, it's, of course, it's who's on the stage. Now, more and more, it's what we are playing, which is great. But I remember several years ago, I was at an Atlanta Symphony Orchestra board meeting, and they have about 5 of the 30 board members are African-American. And I went up to this very prominent, he's a real estate developer in Atlanta, and he comes to all the board meetings. And I said to him, Joe, I love interacting with you at board meetings. I don't see you at concerts very often. And he said, Evans, let me tell you something. I support what the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra is doing because of the talent development program, because of your engaging of African-American soloists and conductors and commissioning works by African-American composers. But I'm not coming to concerts more often until I see more people on the stage who look like me, playing the instruments. Once you have more people who look like me on your stage, I will come, because I want to know that my life experience, and who I am is part of what you do. And I think you both, as artists, all 3 of you as artists, raised something that's very important with regard to this. Some of what we need is keep doing it. In other words, consistently, regularly engage people from the trans community. And not that we don't talk about it, we simply do it because that's the thing that you do. And you don't you try and you eventually try and remove it out of a special case of we're doing the right thing. No, we're doing the thing, and you happen to be X, but I need you to sing Y, and you're the right person for it. And once we get I think we have to reach more of a critical mass of just doing it more often. So I'd like to, at this point, I think we have a few minutes left, and I want to ask Carlos if we have generated some questions from the audience who've joined us online.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. We have not generated questions, but what we have generated is a lot of snaps, applause, just a lot of phenomenal feedback and support of the things that have been said so far. So I just want to thank the panelists for that. I do want to mention, I want to echo Evans's sentiments of that this company does feel very much in support of gender nonconforming trans individuals. When I started back here 3 years ago, Elijah, something about the comments you made really opened me up emotionally, seeing getting to see one of my colleagues, MJ, who I'll mention here, be so proud of themselves and be so accepted in the company, really allowed my own kind of gender identity to be part of the identity. I feel so proud having they pronouns in my business cards from the get-go. And being able to continuously do that within the company has been nice. I do want to ask kind of the question of what do we think has stopped us from exploring gender? And Evans, you mentioned that historically opera was doing that. So I guess my question is, what do we think has stopped us from doing that? Is it whether the fear of people leaving the hall, lack of funds, a combination of any of these factors? Those are the questions that I have.
Freddie, please unmute yourself if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, of course. I also wanted to add to that. Do you think also, Evans, that is a problem specific to America? Because I wonder if as I think about things in Europe, maybe because it's more state funded, I'm more likely to see an ease in gender expression on the stage. However, I am less likely to see the seriousness of it that also comes to mind, I guess. But I'm wondering, is that a regional thing for you as well?
I think some of it is American based. I think that as you point out, Freddie, European theaters, let's call it what it is, German theaters in particular, French theaters as well, not Italy, that's for sure, have the ability, because they are state funded and because artistic expression is for lack of a better way of putting it, a more valued part of culture. I mean, Laura told a wonderful story before we went online to our audience online that, two world leaders used to figure out excuses during major conferences so they could go off and play chamber music. We don't have that anymore. And they were both Europeans, of course. I mean, yes, Bill Clinton played the saxophone. So, but I think it's a bigger challenge in the United States because we do answer as arts organizations to people who give us money. And we don't have the kind of blanket government support that allows us to be as, I don't even know what to call it, the word free, but to be sometimes as adventuresome as our European colleagues are able to do. It's changing, I think, because of and I'll go back to Laura and the kind of support that we were able to generate in the community for As One to raise the funds that were necessary to do all of the ancillary activities. It's getting better. But Laura, you had a comment too.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think, and I used to be an artistic director, arts administrator, and dean. So I knew that huge responsibility of raising money and making your donors comfortable and happy. But I did have an experience early on when As One was beginning to take off, where somebody introduced me at a meeting to a general director of an opera company. And this person had seen the premiere at BAM and had a connection to this company and said, I really want your company to do this. And I've done the research for your community. If we market this and do it in one of these several locations, not at the Opera House, and partner with these organizations, I believe we can sell about 1,500 new tickets to people who've never come before. And the general director said, yes, but we might lose a few of our donors. And so I pretended that I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, well, gee, that would be awful. How many donors would you leave? He said, well, there's Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, and they have a box, and then they come with their friend. Well, she lost her husband, but they usually give this amount. I said, so you might lose 3 or 7 or 8 people, but you're getting 1,500 new people. And you might find out of those 1,500 that there are 10 new people who are going to be lifetime supporters who are 40 years younger, who want to see different kind of stuff. Like, to me, it's not a risk at all, right? I mean, it's like we're just trapped because of the fear of lack of money, because we don't have those subsidies, because the costs of putting on a show are always going to exceed the ticket income potential, that we're frozen with fear about offending a donor. Well, you know what? There's a lot of people with money. Find new donors. Change the story to the donors. I mean, I just got a gift today for the project that's coming to New York, because I just spoke on behalf of the company to somebody, and the reason they're providing the support, it has nothing to do with opera. It's because there's going to be 100 school children singing, high school kids in the arts high schools singing in the chorus. And they like the fact that there's community engagement with young people who will have a real artistic experience. So they gave money. It has nothing to do with traditional opera. There's ways to not be trapped by some of the things that I think Carlos was alluding to.
And there are foundations that do give to adventuresome activity. And Freddie was an integral part of a very important gift that we received as a company. Because back in 2019, when we were doing Porgy and Bess, Morris Robinson came to me at the end of a rehearsal and basically said, why do we only have Porgy and Bess? Why isn't there more opera about positive experiences that involve a primarily African-American cast and story? And we had a conversation. Freddie was part of it. Many of the principals of Porgy and Bess. And at the end of that conversation, I said, I had no reason to say it, but other than my conviction, I said, we're going to do something about it. We're going to make an opera that reflects this conversation. Lo and behold, we pitched it to the Mellon Foundation, and the Mellon Foundation, in the person of the wonderful Susan Fader, said, I don't do one-offs, but I will give you money to do 3 of them over 3 years. And so we now have an incredible grant from the Mellon Foundation to tell new stories. And they will be, we hope, in 25, 26, and 27. So save some time in one of those summers, Freddie, because I want you in one of these shows. Elijah, I'd love for you to start our last bit of the conversation by maybe offering a thought to someone who has not had this experience with non-conforming individuals as artists, or not experienced something in the world of, since we're talking about opera. What is, I hate saying what is a piece of advice, but what is something that someone can be thinking to change their thinking to, as it were, join this new path that we're trying to pursue with gender nonconformity, with an expansive, expanded idea of gender as it relates to the arts? What would you say?
It's a tough question. I mean, thinking back when I was, probably in high school and started hearing about trends and hearing more and more about trans and non-binary people, I dug my heels in back then too. That was not a thing I'd heard before, and I think it just kind of took me time to kind of marinate on it and understand that people know themselves. You're the only person who lives in your head. And that's kind of, people know themselves, or if they don't know themselves, then they're the only people in the position to do that kind of reflection. And I don't know, there are so many interlocking conversations, it's hard to focus on just one thing.
But you've said something extremely valuable in just this part of your answer, is that part of growth is self-examination. You know, I forget who is the great scholar or great person of antiquities who said an unexamined life is not worth living. And I think that one of the things I am obliged to do as a producer, is to examine my approach, examine the stereotypes that I've grown up with in this profession, and work very hard to not take any of them for granted, and not say anything is hard and fast anymore, because it isn't. As Laura is writing an opera where the voice type and the presentation of the character is strictly up to the artists themselves. Freddie, if you were to help someone become more open and engaged with this idea of fluidity, what would you tell them? Other than grow up.
Sorry, there's a parade going down the street, so I'm quite distracted because I want to go parade or scream or something. You know, it was a tough day.
That's for football. That's for a soccer match, by the way.
Oh, that's what that is. Okay, never mind.
Pride is tomorrow morning.
It's a gay soccer match.
I would like that very much, actually. It sounds very entertaining for me. Let's see. Yeah, grow up is the first thing that came to mind. Honestly, Evans, like, seriously, grow the fuck up. Seriously, grow up. However, there's also, I think that I in my mind, I'm wondering if we're not giving the general public as much credit as they deserve. I feel like RuPaul may have been grooming people for this for a while. You know what I mean? In some respect. So I feel like if my first question would be, have you ever been to a drag show? And the answer is yes. And I'm sorry, and this, I hope this isn't offensive to anybody. But if the answer is yes, then you should be able to go to an opera and enjoy somebody on the stage who is playing the character, who is playing a sex of which they may not have been born. I think that's a very simple thing. If you can enjoy something like that, then you can enjoy this. And not far from that is accepting that somebody can be something that they may not have been assigned at birth. Mm-hmm. In my mind, that's just a way to go about that. I don't know. I hope that wasn't offensive in any way, you all. But I always try to make something as simple as possible for laymen. And because I find that so often when people ask me questions about my homosexuality or something, it's a very simple question that I find offensive because it's so easily answered. You know what I mean? But however, so when you ask me how I would deal with that, I come up with a simple, somewhat stupid but easy answer to it.
And it's not stupid or easy at all. It's what's in front of your face. That's all there is to it. Laura, what would you say? As the light changes beautifully, by the way, you must have a lighting designer for this hour.
I'm trying to carefully move my laptop because there's a sun setting and it's creating shadow.
You're becoming very atmospheric. You're becoming you're very, very painterly. But what would you say to someone? Because I'm sure you've had this conversation 100 times with As One.
You know, I would like to think that artists, whether you're an interpretive artist or a producing artist or a generative creative artist, are seeking some kind of human truth, and that we're all sort of storytelling in a way, and that when we connect through our art with our audience and people are transformed and opened up, that's the goal. And I'm going to use Freddie's word. It's not trying to be in any way minimizing or disrespectful, but if we can always hold that core, then all of these variations on a theme of how we are so beautifully different and human are just different ways that we are. And all of these truths are what we share. And if we stop being so narrow and just be open, then we can appreciate all kinds of things. And I think it's good that there's an open conversation now around these particular issues. I think the Porgy and Bess issue is another kind of an issue. All of these things, it's good that we're airing it and talking about it and being sensitive and thoughtful. But artists are just going to continue making true art, interpreting it, finding new meanings in old pieces that don't resonate with today's specific issues, but there's always a reflection because we don't change a lot over history, you know, and we keep making the same kinds of mistakes and the same kinds of advances, and we go forwards and backwards and we fight different issues, but there's this core humanity. And if that's what we keep seeking, I think that it makes for a more open and better and shared artistic experience for all. And I don't know that I answered your question particularly well.
You did very well. All three of you did.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, and we've come to the end of our time, and I can't thank you enough. And for those of you who've been joining us online for these Pride panels this season, thank you again to our panelists for taking the time to join us tonight, especially you, Freddie, in the middle of a very rigorous rehearsal schedule. And of course, thank you to our sponsor, ArtsWave Pride, and to the countless donors that give to ArtsWave to help make this possible. We're in the midst of our season. We hope you'll be able to join us throughout the summer. Single tickets are still available. Walk up or call our box office to purchase tickets. You can also go to our website, cincinnatiopera.org, for more information. And lastly, we are bringing back Pride Night, July the 8th. I hope you'll buy your tickets to celebrate our LGBTQ plus community and continue the efforts of Pride at Music Hall. More information, again, is available on our website. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Elijah. Thank you, Freddie. Have a wonderful evening and a wonderful Pride weekend wherever you are. Bye for now.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.